Can you see my screen? Oh, it's coming.
Yes, great.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Yaye Keita, and I'm a postdoc researcher at Qatar. Originally from Africa, I came here for a better quality of life, better education. So I did a bachelor and master in civil engineering, and later got interested in improving quality of life in transportation. So I did a PhD in transportation planning with a focus on equity. So my dissertation research look at some of the mobility challenges faced by women, especially women with children and low-income women. So long story short, really, for a very long time now, I have a burning desire to contribute to improving quality of life, especially as it relates to improving mobility and accessibility for underserved communities. So the focus of my presentation today will be on equity in transportation, but I would like you to know that this is only one aspect of improving quality of life. So when we ask ourselves, what is equity? So we are asking, how can we address the needs of all communities? And how can we do that in a way that we engage those communities instead of us guessing or even deciding what are those needs? For example, an equitable community, an equitable system provide affordable transportation, create quality jobs, and even promote sustainable, healthy, safe, and inclusive community. It also supports the economy by making sure that all people, regardless of race, income, of even ability, can connect to those desired opportunity like education, like employment, or maybe contribute to society in general. So yes, there are two types of inequality that we face in general: disproportional and institutional. When we talk about disproportional, we are talking about, like, for example, when the outcome of a project create or amplify inequality in only part of the community, while the other part receive the full benefits. So on the other end, institutional inequality is usually embedded in the method. So, and also sometimes justified by systemic policy, or even ignore negative outcome, or even disparate impact. So those kind of system in general, they do not support or even extend support to the needed community. So what are some of the dimensions of equity in transportation? So accessibility, affordability, health and safety, and procedural equity. So when we talk about accessibility, we're asking, how can people access their destination? How easily can people access their destination? So for affordability, we are asking, what are the travel costs to those destinations, especially as a percent of the person income? So health and safety, we are asking, how safely can those people access those destinations? And what are some of the risks associated with the transportation system overall? So for procedural equity, we are asking, is every population group or demographic group in the community engaged in the decision-making process? So I have a 4-minute video here for you. Hopefully it can play. So that will lay out the foundation of some inequity in the, sorry, the foundation of some inequity. Hold on. Okay, sorry, I will let you go then. So this video will lay out the foundation, sorry about that, will lay out the foundation of some inequity in transportation that happen in the US. So, okay. Let me redo it.
We're not hearing the sound on the video.
You not? Let me see. Okay. Is it working?
Not as yet.
Interesting.
And I know there may be an app that we have to turn on to get the sound to play on Teams. Does anyone, has anyone experienced this? I know it happened before when a colleague was trying to play a video. Anyone know how to get video sound to play?
Because it's playing, I can hear it from here, but I have no idea how to.
Okay, hold on. Playing a video. Sharing a video.
Hi there, Jeremy Chan.
Oops. Could you guys have heard that?
Yeah, I heard that from you. So
I'm wondering, maybe that's because when hosting, what is the best way to play a video? Share your screen and select to include system audio.
Oh.
So maybe stop sharing and then come back in and share again and see if there's something that says include system audio.
Yeah, let me try that. And
sorry about that.
Okay, sorry. Sharing. Share system audio. I don't see that. Oh yeah.
You found it?
I found it. So
great.
probably it's going to work this time. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So let me.
It's hard to picture American cities.
Yep, it works.
Perfect. Okay.
Without the highways running through there.
Let me restart so you can.
It's hard to picture American cities without the highways running through their core. But highway removal projects like this one in Boston can give us a sense of how disruptive it was when the U.S. built huge highways through the cities after World War II.
These new highways will have a far-reaching economic impact on the entire nation.
That was definitely true. Highways revolutionized the way we transport goods. But inside cities, they demolished and isolated entire neighborhoods. They gave wealthy taxpayers a way out of the city and gave air pollution and traffic noise a way in. And they redesigned urban life around the car. Now 85% of Americans drive to work every day. So why did American cities agree to build highways that were bad for cities?
It's a really interesting question, and part of it actually goes all the way back to the 1930s, when a group of auto interests, such as General Motors, AAA, formed something called the National Highway Users Conference.
They began lobbying for taxes that would help fund highway construction. General Motors started to design what a new highway system could look like, and they displayed that vision at the 1939 World's Fair with Futurama, an exhibit featuring expressways that not only connected cities, but ran right through them. It was a design that allowed for more cars and less congestion. By 1955, the Department of Commerce echoed GM's vision with something called the Yellow Book. It laid out all the routes that interstates would take throughout the country under Eisenhower's Federal Highway Act of 1956, which funded the national highway system.
A lot of it's logical. It's, connecting most of the U.S.'s major cities. But the really interesting thing is you also have highways slicing right through the downtowns of many of these cities. Pretty much every major city in the country, New York, D.C., San Francisco, Philadelphia, you have major highways cutting through neighborhoods, requiring the demolition of lots of housing and other sorts of buildings.
That's largely because some of the key contributors to the plan were auto industry members, but no urban planners.
And that's because the profession barely even existed at the time. Nowadays, there's a value placed on preserving neighborhoods, on keeping cities intact, and that concept just really didn't even exist in the 40s and 50s. When people were talking about connecting the country with highways, it seemed pretty natural just to drive highways through the center of cities as well.
Local municipalities were particularly eager to build highways under this plan because 90% of funding came from the federal government, and the other 10% from states.
There's also a darker side to the reason why all these planners wanted to build highways through downtowns and urban neighborhoods.
Highways not only paved the way for more and more white people to move into homogeneous suburbs, they also provided cover for targeted demolitions inside the city.
During that era, federal policies and implicit priorities of planners dictated that you had, vibrant, dense downtown neighborhoods filled mostly with African-American residents. Instead of being preserved under the plan, they were slated as targets for removal. They were considered blight, and an easy way of getting rid of that blight was by demolishing them and paving a highway through it.
Neighborhoods and streetcars were pushed aside to make way for the automobile.
Look at the neighborhoods of Black Bottom and Paradise Valley in Detroit.
When you go back to the 30s and 40s, these are thriving, dense neighborhoods filled with hundreds of thousands of residents, of businesses. And if you go back today, they're mostly just empty grass plots.
This wasn't just a historical accident. It became a pattern in cities across the country. Poor and minority residents were displaced to make way for highways, and white residents used those highways to commute into the city for jobs and commute back home at night.
The only exception to this pattern is in places where highways were slated to go through wealthy neighborhoods.
There were actually proposals to put a highway through Northwest DC and through Greenwich Village in Manhattan. But you can guess what happened there.
Anywhere where residents had the means to organize and protest, they were often able to stop the highways from being built. Whereas in places where residents didn't have the political capital and other sorts of privileges that allow you to do that, their neighborhoods ended up being demolished, and they're now highways today.
Even before he signed the Federal Highway Act of 1956, Eisenhower was already a really big fan of highways in general. Part of that has to do with his time in Germany during World War II, where he realized how important it is to have a good system of highways to transport goods and people very efficiently, but also has to do with this military road trip that he took in 1919, where he went all the way from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, California. And that road trip took 62 days at the time, and today it takes about 42 hours. And part of that had to do with the state of cars at the time, but it also had to do with the state of roads at the time. And after seeing that, he realized that 62 days was way too long to wait in any situation where they might need to defend the country. And that's where he became such a big fan of highways.
Okay.
It's hard to picture American cities without the...
We saw in the video, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So we saw in the video how some community were displaced or even demolished to make space for highways, and how those actions affected quality of life for those communities. So it also led to sprawling communities and a community depending on cars. So I'm wondering, what do you think is important for restoring the system and making it sustainable community? I don't know if anybody has an answer for that. Before.
Like walking pathways through communities, easy ways to transit by walking or bicycle.
Good. Yeah, that's one way. Any other? Okay. So yeah, I think policy also has a good role to play here. Several government laws.
Yeah, they all should be able to answer that question. Are you okay with just one answer, or you want more?
Either, yeah, more will be great.
So could some of you unmute yourself and just throw out some answers? So the question was, what was the question again?
So what can we do to restore the system or to make it sustainable?
Okay.
What are we doing? I know we're doing already something. So that was the question. So.
Okay.
I was going to say just more community involvement and engagement in general. So the community was more aware of these projects and they had more say to the different highways that were in infrastructure that was being built, then maybe they could stop it or recommend other changes.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Madeline.
Thank you. Any other one before we move? Okay. So,
Chrisanne, were you about to say something?
No.
Oh, I was gonna go on Madeline's, topic that the project team could have, I guess, engaged more with the community itself with more, like a new level of leadership to make sure that even with community outreach just in the beginning of the project that it follows through so people become more aware of it and have more input, like Madeline said.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, so those are all great answers. So we need more engagement for sure, and we need, infrastructure, active transportation, and sustainable infrastructure. So, several governments. What else can we do at the government level is, policy. So several government law and orders were passed to mitigate some of those effects. One of the general one is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which kind of makes sure that there is no discrimination in the federal program based on race of place or place of origin. So another one is the American with Disability Act, which prohibits discrimination and ensure, equal access to opportunity and access for persons with disability. Several other executive orders were passed to address the environmental justice issue in minority, low income, limited English proficiency communities. Why? Okay, better. Okay. So maybe some of you are also wondering now, what can we do to evaluate the equity of our transportation system? So one way to do that is to estimate the share of income spent on transportation. As you can see on this graph, low-income families spend a larger share of their income on transportation than high-income family or welfare family. So another way to look at equity is that a question? Okay. So another way to look at equity is to look at the infrastructure. As we can see here, street with sidewalk on both sides, street with lighting, street with traffic calming feature are common in high-income community than low-income communities. Another equity factor is safety, which is very important, and we can see that here, low-income people are twice likely to be killed in fatal crashes than high-income people. And this is a problem in Tampa even here. So the same statistic is true for older people, similar statistic for older people and people of color. I would like to take a few moments here to talk about an equity project I work on at Carter. So for that project, we look at some systematic ways to integrate equity into MPO project prioritization process. What is an MPO? An MPO is a government organization in charge of allocating federal funding to a transportation project and program in the regions. So for this project, we ask several questions. We ask, what is the current state of the practice? What are the best practices? How can we help MPO integrate equity into the processes? So to do that, on top of looking at the materials, the MPO online materials, we also interview some of the MPO around the world, around the US, sorry. We found that there are four main approaches used by MPO that consider equity. Those approaches included defining community of concern, involving those community, using different transportation method or different method to evaluate equity of the transportation project, and also looking at the overall investment. I'm going to go through each one of those in the next slide. Defining and locating community of concern. This is the key step to locating underserved area. So most of the MPO have expanded the list beyond minority, low income, elderly, disabled, and zero vehicle as well, and even included like female-aided household receiving welfare, etc. So another approach is identifying community of concern. And a common approach used by MPO is the threshold-based approach, where the MPO look at the areas of underserved population, where the area of underserved population is higher than the regional threshold. Some of the MPO are looking beyond that and are looking at multiple equity indicators and combining them into a single measure. For example, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, which is an MPO in the Iran Delaware, so use similar indices, and those indices were divided into 8 different levels and classified into low and high equity areas, as you can see. And they use the census tract as the unit of geography. Great. Involving community of concern. Public involvement is a required process for all MPOs. So, but the key question is the process ongoing? Is it inclusive? Is it targeted to each audience? So during our research, we found that some MPO, on top of conducting a general public involvement, also look at engaging underserved population. And some of the methods they use to do that include like workshop, focus group, etc. But, and on top of all of those, they also translate their materials in different languages. And often all the meetings in underserved area to make it accessible for those communities. And some of them even provide incentives for them to participate. We also find that the MPO use different method and measure to evaluate the equity of their project and investment. And one of the measure is transportation and housing affordability. So transportation and housing consume a larger share of household income in the United States, as you may know. So the key is some places with low transportation costs often have or often lack affordable housing, which is an issue and creates some accessibility barrier for underserved population. So transportation and housing index not only look at and consider transportation variable, it also consider neighborhood variables to identify places that are affordable and places that are not. For example, the Association of Bay Area Government look at similar indices in California. It is an MPO in California. So they look at similar indices to evaluate the equity impact of their plan scenarios. And they do that by comparing affordability for low-income individuals and high-income individuals. And they do that for different types of projects, as you can see in the table. Displacement and gentrification risk is another way to look at affordability. So, for example, Southern California Association of Governments, they look at gentrification of transit-oriented communities, which are communities with within like half mile from transit stations. So, from the analysis, they found that older people and Hispanic people, so they have less chances to have housing around those stations. So that was the issue they found out in the analysis. Health and safety impact of our project are also important equity dimension. And Example of such impact include exposure to crashes, exposure to noise and emission, access to active transportation, like you mentioned, access to healthy grocery store, healthcare, etc. So we found out that the Atlanta Regional Commission look at access to grocery store, hospital, public park from equity target areas. So, and they compare how those access compare to non-equity target areas. Accessibility is another dimension of equity explored by MPOs. So some MPO look at transit coverage and connectivity when they evaluate accessibilities. Or they look at proximity and access to different type of places or destination like employment. Polk County, Florida TPO is an example of MPO that look at accessibility when evaluating their projects. So they even created mobility index, which kind of consider different variables, including connectivity, number of destination, etc. And the important part is they focus on underserved population and they engage them in the process. Distributional equity is another way MPO look at equity. So they do that in several different ways. So they look at the total investment, sometimes per capita, or they look at the spatial distribution of the total project or the total spending and try to see how is the spending when they do the total in underserved area compared to non-underserved area. And they look at the benefit and burden and compare underserved area and non-underserved areas. For example, the Atlanta Regional Commission examined the investment per capita in equity target area compared to non-equity target area. With that, I think that concludes my presentation. I don't know if you have any question. Open to discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Keita. I would open it up and see, ask you to unmute or raise your hands so we can call on you if you have questions on the presentation. Thanks for that, because it's always good to hear from the transportation side how equity is being used or trying to be addressed.
Exactly.
So, who wants to go first with questions? Let me look back on my notes and who wrote about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Kent?
Are you muted?
Kent is muted. I know he had a question, or he was curious on the last mile option.
Okay.
So I would assume you have a question.
Yeah, I wrote about the last mile problem in my reflection.
So what's a question you have for Dr. Keita based on the presentation?
So what do these MPOs do with regards to like public transit funding and such for communities that need that.
Okay. That's a good question. So the MPO, like I say, let me go back to the slide. I don't know if I have a great one that can. For example, they use different methods, like the affordability one, for example. We can see that the row number 3 here, they look at transit. So they look at different mode. They usually do it based on funding, you know, how many funding or how many projects are they doing that's going to improve like affordability based on transit projects that's going to improve affordability for those communities. So there are a lot of variation in here. So depending on the MPO, they use different methods. But for sure, they try to make sure that the percent of their spending on transit is similar. Some MPO try to make sure that the percent spending on transit is similar to the percent spending on roadways, or maybe on other modes or other project types. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that answers it, I think. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Someone else with a question?
Yeah, I'll go, Dr. Turret. So, I guess just in general, do you think that like policies and governmental influence is the best way to address inequity in infrastructure, or it's just what your research has kind of focused on?
Yeah, great, thank you, great question. And yeah, so this is a personal decision that I'm making right now, but to be honest with you, I think policy has a lot to do with addressing equity, you know. So when there is policy, so top-down approach will work well when we, as well as bottom-up also. It depends on how we approach it, but I think top-down is very important to influence decision. Like, you know, which type of project, you know, are we going to fund, you know, like, and all of those. So they look at the policy and trying to make sure that the decision is, you know, aligning with those policy. So, but on the other end, also, we need to, like I told you, engaging the community is huge. So that's the bottom-up approach. You know, we need to know what's going on within the community. What do they need? You know, how can we help them? Even though there are policies, maybe we should revise them often based on, you know, the needs of the community. You know, so that's something that's a project that I'm trying to propose right now. So it's both, really, if we take it. So the first thing is policy is important to influence decision right now, but those policies could also be updated, you know, based on the needs of the community. Or we can have more policy based on the needs of the community. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
So maybe I can ask a follow-up, because you mentioned a social equity advisory committee. I would assume that, and I know our MPO in Hillsborough County had started a community advisory committee. And so what is a social equity committee? What is that, the composition of people on something like that?
Okay, that's a great question. I think the social equity community can be mixed, not only include decision makers, but also some member of the community or some representative of the underserved population. So you need to have a lot of representative from the underserved areas, as well as some decision makers at the table. Did that answer your question, or maybe?
It does. And then what kind of power or agency do they have in influencing MPO decisions?
That's a great point. That's something I don't know right now at the top of my mind, but I know that MPO are working with like employment people, because we think employment everything, because during our research we find out that community members, like underserved people, they do have probably jobs, but accessing those jobs is the issue, you know. So now the employment people, they say that maybe they find jobs for those people, but the thing is they cannot get to the job because they don't have the transportation. So we need those employment people at the table, not only those, but also transportation people, all mix of community representatives. So I don't know if that answers your question or if you would like to ask again.
No,
yeah.
I think that's good. I think there's probably some research that could be done even in Tampa to look at like sort of who was part of that, what views did they have, and then how did the MPO include that in their voting on some type of project. Does someone else have a question?
I agree that there is a room for a lot more research on those areas.
Also, Dr.
Charlene?
Fox. Yes.
Yeah, that's clear.
So very interesting presentation. Thank you. I had a question, or maybe it's just musing. In terms of ride sharing app and on-demand transits that's perhaps taken over in certain cities, how then do you address equity in terms of the new technologies that are now being used in transportation?
Great question. You know, I'm exploring that thing as well, especially related to COVID-19. So that's a great point. There are a lot of barriers for underserved population when we talk about, you know, sharing mobility. You know, one of the barrier is first of all, some of those bike sharing and even those infrastructure are located mostly in high-income area or non-underserved areas. So even the Uber and Lyft, there is something, they say that it takes a long time for them to reach those underserved areas. So they have a long wait time, you know. So on top of all of those location issues, there are also like credit, access to banking issues. Most of the underserved population, they don't have bank accounts. So using those systems require having bank account. That's another issue that, you know, that's a barrier for them to use those systems. So, and on top of all those, there are culture issues. Some people are not used to sharing ride with people, and depending of the type of culture they're coming from, so they may be reluctant to use those systems. And many different kind of barriers facing them. So the way I'm seeing this is both ways, not only policy, also engaging those community, and also not only policy maker. I think we need community members as well as share providers. You know, we need all three at the table to come up with a solution. But we know that is an issue right now that need addressing, especially because of you know what's happening now the COVID-19. A lot of people are depending on, you know, shared mobility or to access those needs, you know. And I was reading one of the paper that said that, you know, kind of isolating at home and maybe, you know, getting all your needs, you know, being at home is a privilege. You know, not everybody can do that. You know, not all the community can do that. So we need to find out how we can address that in the near future. Really, that answer your question?
Yes. Yes.
No problem. Thank you.
It's interesting because I think I've been in some discussions about the automated vehicles, and their discussions about them being sort of driven by someone, but that someone is home. And so that the future of these jobs of, say, an Uber car is not that it's going to be a person picking you up, but it's going to be an Uber car driven remotely by someone who doesn't have to leave home to be paid, which I thought was interesting. I think on the other side, you have people who are asking, well, we want vibrant communities that we could walk around, eat, get everything in, you know, within a certain square mile of the place. And so, and still be paid, like, you know, for the students that are on here, and, you know, you, me, we still work from home because you have these skill sets. And so when we think of investing in communities, because a lot of this is coming up in terms of workforce development, I think it's also to think of sort of what kinds of future jobs are you preparing someone for? You know, is it for to sit at home and drive a car?
Yeah.
You know, or is it something else that that could be done? So I think those it's just really interesting questions, and especially as we think of the space we're working in and sort of where that income goes, because when we think of the automated vehicles, the company that's earning the most out of that is sort of based in California, sort of taken jobs away from your city, right? The tax and so on. So I think it's really interesting to start thinking about that, especially in times when you're seeing your city and jobs like collapsing during the pandemic. As we move towards these more automated places.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in terms of workforce development, are those discussions that you have with the companies that are employing people?
Not really. I didn't even talk to, but some of the issue that I found out while we were looking at the MPO stuff is that the employment people, they just mentioned that they need connection to those employment, those underserved population, because they do their job and they kind of give them the job. But the thing is they cannot access the thing. But I didn't talk about the automation part. Maybe that's a new, you know, aspect that I probably will look at in the future for sure. Yeah.
Or hopefully not. I know I've been in worked with the Tampa Vocational Institute, and there was a time a business presenter who has a painting company, and so he was ready to employ folks, but it requires, you know, they're painting, and so they work in groups of, you know, 3 to 4 persons at a time, and it does require you to sort of be able to go and pick up supplies, and then go to the work site. And that issue of transportation came up, even in terms of how to connect different workers together. And so it wasn't necessarily that you needed the Uber or something like that, but maybe it was just some tool that allowed you to say, oh, you know, Yai and Maya are closer to this area, so they could pick each other up and, you know, go to this or something. So something to make things more efficient, given that the bus system doesn't get people there, and, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe an Uber system for workforce needs, you know, that is sort of not the passenger vehicle, but one for people trying to work, like, you know, construction, that kind of job.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
Questions?
So yeah, like you said, and yeah, like you mentioned, one of the barrier is really internet, you know, access for those underserved. They need that to be able to use this new system that are coming. So
lack of Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
And that's important. We've seen in certain communities just accessing internet for K through 12 as some school districts went online.
Yeah.
Big discrepancies in terms of, you know, some populations, like at least 40% were not accessing any school material in the spring.
Wow.
A lot of it linked either to Wi-Fi or not having a computer.
Yes.
Or some system to connect. So I'm glad you bring that up in terms of how it links back into transportation. Does anyone else have a question? a lot of you wrote about the university community area and even getting, what does potential options look like for USF and connecting to University Mall. So do you have any questions for Dr. Keita? This is our transportation expert here. So I don't think we've held any of those, what do you call them? The integration piece. I don't think we've even held any of those discussions between USF and the mall in terms of like large consultations, that would really get the students excited about opportunities there.
Exactly.
So
yeah, the university area community, they need a lot of in one of our research, we are looking at them and they need a lot of help, especially related to access to transit. In one of our research, we find out that even riding the bus, it looks like there are some limit to how many bags they can carry with them in the bus. So that's why we found, I said, wow. So why they don't let them bring all of them? So they cannot use the transit, to go to the grocery store, because when they're more than in like maybe 5 bags, they cannot bring it in the bus. So that's an issue that they raised in one of the surveys that they did over there in the community area.
Wait, the bus actually has a limit to the number of grocery bags you could bring on.
Exactly. So that's an issue that the university area raised. People in the university area raise as issues, transportation issues.
I wonder where that, I have an idea of where something like that would come from, but that is pretty horrible if the bus is your only means of getting around, right?
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
For any students who use the bus to go to the grocery store, have you encountered that, or you guys don't buy more than 5 bags worth of stuff?
So maybe.
I think that point emphasizes why it was really important to be on the ground and surveying and getting to build trust and hearing those stories.
Exactly.
And then being able to sort of ask Hearts or whoever, like, where did this come from and how does it, how does it impact? I think it would have a larger impact on things like gender and so on also. Right? So you'll be wasting multiple trips to go to the grocery store instead of one.
Yes,
so,
for sure.
Yeah, I wonder how they even, like, if you had a cart, right? Because if you're using a bus and cart, how easily it is to get that on a bus.
I'm
or to
wondering
store it, so yeah.
That shouldn't be an issue, but that's an issue that was raised in one of the surveys. I said, wow, so it's not easy then to access grocery store from those areas. So if you cannot even, sorry, I'm sorry.
That kind of pushes you to something like an Uber, which is more expensive.
Yeah.
And requires things like credit cards and that sort of stuff. So does anyone else have a question?
I have a question. As far as any work abroad, I'm not sure if you've worked abroad at all, but I'm interested in developing countries and maybe some of the policies that you've seen that have worked there, how systems work outside of the US.
Great question. To be honest with you, I just know Mali and the US. I haven't traveled abroad a lot, or I haven't even explored so well the transportation system in Mali yet, even though that's one of my plans in the future. But yeah, I cannot talk to that too much because I've only experienced and researched transportation system in the US.
Sometimes I think that that what we experience here in Tampa, I feel, and then you see some of the projects that are being done in other places around the world with many different transit options or mobility options. I think it's good to sort of be exposed, and in terms of the development projects that are happening in low and middle income countries, they have to meet, for many to get funding, they have to meet lots of different sustainability type targets that require stakeholder consultation, gender analyses, and all these sorts of things. So sometimes they may or may not, sometimes they what you get to work on and what those things look like are a little more exciting than what we might see here also.
Yeah, now that remind me. So I did some research, like comparing a while ago, Europe and the US, like, for example, what's causing those car-dependent communities, In Europe, the common transportation is very developed. So why is that the case? It's because of the policy over there. First of all, the gas tax is so high. So people, they prefer to take, public transportation than to drive. So parking is not even available in those places like in Europe. So here parking is plenty, we can easily park. So we choose to drive because it's easy, because the gas tax is low. And that's one aspect that I came across in the past related to different policy abroad and the US. I don't know if that kind of addressed a little bit your question. But policy is huge, in how, the communities, like how people choose to move around in a community. So if it's easy for me, I will use the easiest mode, But if it's difficult, I'll go for transit. So
yeah, that definitely answers some of my question. I'm curious because I live in the Virgin Islands, and it's interesting because we don't have many ride sharing options. I've always been curious as to, how some of these companies decide where to go and when to go. So, but yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I just Googled Mali and mobility and projects, and this was this year. And so this is the Global Environment Facility investing in lessons for e-mobility. So it's some places, some countries, have leapfrogged sort of, wired internet and that sort of stuff. And you have a lot of business that occurs on your cell phone. So you pay a lot of things on it. You just do a lot more work on the cell phone, as that has people have a lot more access to the phones. And so this one is talking, I think, in terms of some of that, plus incentives for electric cars. So yeah, and so showcasing an e-scooter.
Wow.
It's electric in that case.
Yeah.
So that's just to say, again, emphasizing that sometimes in outside of Tampa, there may be a lot more exciting things going on.
For sure.
Because a lot of the built infrastructure, or the other types of infrastructures are not sort of, built there as yet. So it's easier to innovate something that might be more sustainable.
Exactly.
Any more questions? Well, if we don't have any more questions, I would just like to thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure, really.
We will probably ask for your assistance again. The students they're going to think of a group project, and we'll brainstorm a little later on. And I'm sure from the reflection so far, there's lots of interest on mobility issues in Tampa, and particular around the university area.
Okay, that would be great.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Right.
So folks, we are, I will release the survey for, oh, there was something in chat. Oh, it was just a thank you. Okay, I will release the survey. Let me stop recording. And